Hello everyone, this is Gene and I'm back with another video. So this video is a request from Blue Wind. Blue Wind had asked me in the, I believe it's the screen time video, how I would have made Kamala Khan. So I wanted to approach this in two parts. I wanted to tell the story of how I would have made Kamala if I could have written her story from the beginning, and then how I would write her story now if I worked in Marvel and I were assigned to it. So here's basically the way I would have done it. How do I put it? Let me back up. There are two things I think that Kamala as a character has always been missing from her writers, which are, those two things are an actual character arc and growth and change, a coming of age story. She's a character who's supposed to be, 17 years old at present, yet she still feels like, the 14, 15-year-old she started out as. I can't say I've read every story of hers, but I have read a little bit of her background and some of her major stories, and she doesn't feel like she's grown. She's had a few moments of growth, like her Never Meet Your Heroes storyline with Captain Marvel, but I don't think that growth has really followed the character. It's one of those things like you would see often in cartoons back in the day, where like the character learns the Aesop, or they learn the lesson of the episode for that episode, and then they just go back to being who they are, when the show comes on again next time. So I wouldn't want to do that. If I had written her from the beginning, I would have taken inspiration from coming of age stories such as the one told with the character of Yusuke Urameshi in Yu Yu Hakusho. How he goes from an angry young man to a young man who now has something worth fighting for, and interestingly enough, also something that means enough to him that he's willing to walk away from the fighting. Of course, that being Keiko at the end. So there's that. Or the character growth of Ahsoka, as she grew from this, bratty teenage child into, this honorable Jedi warrior. I'm not going to call her Jedi Knight since she left the Order, but this Jedi warrior, right? So that's what I would do. Those are the type of stories I would have told if I had written the character from the beginning. So the way I would have and the second thing Kamala, I think, has always been missing is darkness. There isn't too much darkness to her stories. I really can't think of a story arc or a run where it's been consistently dark, right? You can look at, say, again, Yu Yu Hakusho, right? Season 3 was especially dark. It started getting darker and darker and darker as the series went on, but I think that it was darkest in Season 3. And I think those are the two things Kamala's always been missing. So if I wrote her from the beginning, those are the two things that would have been sort of featured in a constant presence in the book. This character growth and having these moments of darkness and these sort of I guess turning point or forks in the road where she needs to make a decision, a moral decision, and that moral decision is going to change her life, right? She would have villains that are a reflection of her in some way, or they're the opposite of her in some way. For example, with Yusuke, right? Toguro was in many ways something Yusuke wanted to be, right? Big, strong, powerful, nobody messes with him. But to get that power, right, Toguro had to turn his back and on everything and everyone he had ever loved. He had to give up all of his morals and eventually kill Genkai, right? The woman that he once loved and the only person on his team who had the foresight enough to remain human. So stuff like that, or for example, Sensui, who like Yusuke was a spirit detective, but the same truths that Yusuke, how do I put it? Yusuke and Sensui are that character where you put them in the same situation and they have two different outcomes, right? Yusuke is confronted with the darkness in humanity, and he's like, well, what do you expect? People are bastards, right? Whereas with Sensui, he had been so pure of mind and heart that when he was confronted with how debased humans could be, it broke his mind, right? So I think not that Kamala's stories would ever get that dark, but I definitely think I would put those type of characters in that story, in her stories, right? Someone who is this dark reflection of her, or these characters again who have a similar experience or upbringing to her, but they went in a totally different direction, right? Those type of classic characters. So there's that. But the story I would tell, the way I would start it off, is that Kamala would be, I think, a bit the same, except that she would be a bit more privileged. She would come from an affluent family, living in a nice neighborhood, an affluent neighborhood in Jersey City. And she would be a bit basic. She would be a bit basic, and she would be a bit bratty, kind of like Ahsoka was in the beginning of Clone Wars. But she wouldn't be a bad person. She would just be a bit clueless, as teenagers are. And she wouldn't be aware of her cluelessness, as teenagers often are not. And the less admirable parts of her attitude would be more due to the fact that she's led a very sheltered life, so she doesn't really understand how the real world operates. She doesn't understand that not everybody lives the way she does. And I think the running theme, if I wrote the character from the beginning, would be a reality check. Her stories would be a reality check. They would be opening her eyes to the world outside of her bubble. So what I would do is that, excuse me, I would keep actually a fair amount of her origin. I don't mind the fact that she's a cosplay superhero. That's something I would actually use. She would be a cosplay superhero in the beginning because she's a fan of superheroes. She's a fan of Captain Marvel, right? And then over time, she would learn and grow and become her own hero, and therefore her costume would change. It would look less like a cosplay and more like an actual hero costume. It would be symbolic of her growth as a character, that she's changing, that she's growing into her role as a superhero, as she no longer views it as something as she no longer views it as dress up, right? She understands, or she would come to understand, what it means to be a hero, and what it means to be a hero out there, and to have a look, and what it means to be a living symbol, a living embodiment of the best in a person, and what that responsibility is. So that's the type of story or stories I would tell with her. It's kind of like how a person starts out like the fan of a certain, say, like style of music or a certain band, and then when they're an adult, they end up actually joining the band, right? It's the difference between being a fan of something and then actually doing that thing. So that's the story, or at least one of the stories I would tell with her. But her origin story would remain largely the same, right? She would sneak out, go to a party her parents said no to. She would be exposed to the Terrigen Mist. The difference is that she would not get the stretchy band and big hands powers, but she would get, at least if I did it, what she would get is actually healing hands, a sort of healing factor she can enact onto others, but with a twist. The healing factor is impacted by her emotional state, by how much she wants this person to live or to die. So the same hands that could, maybe bring a person from the brink of death once she was strong enough could also be the same hands that actually kill this person, or bring them close to a death if she was angry enough, and if she really wanted that person to die, or if she wanted, or if she really hated them, right? it would be fueled by sort of her unconscious thoughts. So it would really, sort of force her to confront both the light and the dark in her personality, right? And the light and the dark in a hero, because a hero has to be willing to do both. A hero has to struggle with both the light in their personality and then the darkness in them, right? The desire to save lives and the willingness to kill. So those are the type of things I would do with her. And when it came to her story or story structure or how she would deal with like teenage life, what I would do was I would actually borrow a hell of a lot from Batman Beyond. I always thought, at least to me, in all the comics and TV shows and whatnot I've seen, I always thought Batman Beyond did a great job of showing what it really would be like for a teenager to be moonlighting as a superhero, right? Terry always coming home tired. He can't tell his parents. He's always beat up and bruised. He always needs Max to cover for him, to explain to his girlfriend why he's never around. So I would actually borrow a lot from Batman Beyond, right? Definitely Bruno would probably be Kamala's Maxine, right? That sort of how would you put it? I think not love interest, I guess you could say, kind of like the best friend that you share everything with and that you're really close to, almost like a lover, except that you are in lovers. Although I do think Bruno would still have his crush, but I don't think Kamala would return it. Though there would eventually be a storyline where I would give Kamala a secret boyfriend and then have her parents find out, because that is something, at least from what I know of, that at least some Muslim girls have experienced, right? They want to start dating like other girls. Their parents, particularly the fathers, tend to be very traditional and conservative, and so they hide it from a dad, and then trouble ensues, right? What I would do with the character is that I would do my best to strike a balance, because I would not want to be disrespectful to Islam and the Muslim faith. It's not a faith I practice personally, but I don't mind the character being Muslim, and I don't see a point in trying to be disrespectful toward the religion. At the same time, I would not allow the fact that she's Muslim I would not allow the fact that she's Muslim to dictate to me what stories to tell with her. It's a story that I would want to be faithful to, accurate to. And here's the thing: when you're living as a fairly devout religious person in a secular world, you are going to have challenges. And at least in the stories I've seen with Kamala Khan, she hasn't really had real challenges to her faith, or even a crisis of faith, right? Of at least religious faith. Whereas in other characters and other comics, such as Daredevil, Nightcrawler, and even on DC with Huntress, right? The writers have been willing to actually use the character to tell that crisis of faith story, have them lose their faith or become unsure in it, right? They've done things like have Huntress take off her cross and like throw it into the river and everything. So I think that if you're willing to do that to Christian characters, if you're willing to tell that story, then I think that so long as it's appropriate and makes sense within the context and within the character, you should be willing to tell a similar tale of a crisis of faith with a Muslim character or anybody who is not Christian. It seems to me that writers have no problem doing these type of things with Christian characters, but they won't do it for a Jewish character, or they won't do it for a Muslim or a character of a non-Christian religious faith. And that's not a rule I would hold to. I would do my best to tell that story while still being respectful to the faith, but also to the experience of the young Muslim American girl going to a secular American high school. Right. So that's the way I would handle it, more or less. I would give her storylines that bring her face to face with her own morality, that force her to make hard choices, that actually force her to grow up and realize that being a hero is not all fun and games. That's actually very hard work, and that it takes a toll on you physically, it takes a toll on you emotionally, it takes a toll on you morally, right? I would take from, again, Yu Yu Hakusho, Ahsoka's growth in Clone Wars, even some classic X-Men. Like, there was this arc in the X-Men where Storm becomes leader, and the pressures of leadership and having to make those hard choices. For example, when she stabs Callisto in the heart, right? Those morally ambiguous choices bring Storm face to face with her own killer instincts, with her own darker side, and it's at war with her more pacifist belief in nature, and it actually really makes her angry. In fact, that godforsaken punk look came about during that storyline when she's very much in conflict over her emotions, and she hasn't learned to sort of marry the peaceful woman and the leader and the warrior yet. So again, it would be those type of stories I would tell if I had written Kamala Khan from the start. So it'd be very similar to Batman Beyond, but instead of, a teenage delinquent, looking for redemption, Kamala would be, a sort of a bratty, sheltered teenager who has this very pie in the sky idea of what heroism is and what being a hero is. She thinks it's all fun and games, and then she would somehow be brought into Captain Marvel's fold. I honestly think Captain Marvel, they totally ruined her during Civil War II anyway. So what I would have done is that Captain Marvel would have just put the Avengers have to have a website or something at this point. So there would be a notice like on a website, like, young teen heroes, right? Do you want to work with an experienced hero? Sign up here. It would be that type of thing, right? So surprisingly simple. And that's how she would get in touch with a Captain Marvel and get her first dose of reality, which is that you never meet your heroes. So that's what I would do with her if I had written her from the start, more or less. Now I want to go in a different direction, which is, what would I do with her if I could write her now, right? If I could write her post this outlawed comic. Here's what I would do. What I would do is that I would actually make her have a crisis of faith, but faith in herself, faith in being a superhero. Because what would happen is, right, at the end of the Outlawed book, as I showed in my review, Kamala is seriously injured. She's in the hospital, right? And I think this is one of the few times, if not the first time, at least that I'm familiar with in her stories, that she's actually been brought face to face with her mortality, right? Face to face with death. This is like literally, at least to my knowledge, her first major brush with death. Now we all know Kamala's gonna live, right? They're not gonna actually kill the character. It's bad optics, but putting her in a coma does make it serious. And right, for all of her superheroics, she's still only 17 years old, right? She has a life to live. And so what I think is that what I would do is that I would basically borrow from like season 4 Korra. Now I know people didn't like that show, but hear me out. The reason I would borrow from season 4 Korra is because while that season was flawed, I liked the themes that were covered in that season, right? Korra having to recover physically and mentally because she was nearly killed at the end of season 3 when Zahir poisoned her with the mercury, right? And she has to face her fears. She has to face, again, she has to face her own mortality, and she has to build herself back up, not just mentally, but physically and emotionally. And she ends up a different person for the experience. So I would do something similar with Kamala, right? You don't just go through a near death experience and bounce back when you're healthy enough and go, okay, I want to do this again. No, there's going to be apprehension. There's going to be fear. She's going to think, oh my God, I could have been killed. I could have left my brother and my niece and my parents and Bruno and my friends. I could have died, right? So I think that she would have a real crisis of faith, crisis of confidence, and really ask herself if she really wants to be a hero, if she's really willing to go in, right, to every situation knowing that she may not come back home, right? So that's the way I would do it. I would borrow a lot from season 4, in particular, season 4 Korra. In particular, I would have Kamala reach out to older heroes who have died or who have been brought near death. For example, She-Hulk, she was nearly killed in Civil War. Wolverine was killed and resurrected. Even Captain Marvel. Even Captain Marvel. Because I do think that although they have their differences, Captain Marvel is someone Kamala still greatly admires, and Carol has died before. So I think she would contact them and ask them, how did you bounce back? How did you overcome this fear? How did you make peace with what happened to you? Right? And she would ask them, what makes being a superhero worth it to you? Right? Carol, you were nearly killed by Rogue. Wolverine, you've been nearly killed 100 times and you were killed. Right? She-Hulk, you were nearly killed by Captain Marvel. What makes it worth it to you to come back after going through those type of experiences and know that, hey, my life is forfeit. So long as I'm being a superhero, I could die at any moment. What makes it worth it to you? So she would have this conversation with them. This would be a period, at least in story time, be like several months, like 6-7 months, right? And I think in the end, she would try to go back out on a mission, like her first mission back, and it would go well, but she just wouldn't feel right, right? Her heart wouldn't be in it. She would still feel that fear and apprehension. She would flinch or pause where previously she wouldn't. And she realizes that as a superhero, she cannot be apprehensive, right? So I think at that point she would hang up the Miss Marvel garb, and I think she would say, look, as so long as I'm in this place of fear, I can't effectively be a hero, and honestly, I don't know if I want to be a hero anymore. I think I just want to live life for a while as Kamala Khan, regular inhuman high school girl. So I think, at least temporarily, she would hang it up. And then, of course, that would open up the Miss Marvel name, which I would have Carol take back. And I would write a redemption arc for Carol, but that's a different story. But that's how I would write Kamala currently, right, from Outlaw #1 on. If I had it my way, that's what I would do with the character. And to go back for a moment to if I had written it from the beginning, what would happen is that as she grows and grows and grows and becomes more of a superhero and develops more of a superhero's mindset, she would stop. How do I put it? She would want her own name eventually, right? She would stop wanting to be in Captain Marvel's shadow, be Captain Marvel light, and eventually she would discard the Captain Marvel name and call herself Jersey Girl. That's what I would do. But that's if I had written her from the beginning. If I could write her from Outlawed on, she would ultimately, after a lot of soul searching, temporarily retire from superheroics. So that's what I would do, personally. So let me know what you think, and I will see you all in the next one. Have a good day or night. Stay healthy, stay inside, but try to get a little bit of sunlight. At least open your windows if at all possible. So I'll see you around. Be good, everyone. Bye.